So hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So first, a little bit about me. As Przemek said, my name is Baptiste. You can find me online with this name. That's my Twitter. I'm on IRC. That's my email at Gmail. That's my GitHub. So consistent branding. If you're looking for me, that's me. I'm a web developer, and I've been a Django core developer since June last year. What about this talk? So I'm going to be talking about Django. Who here is familiar with Django? Looks like most of you. So just first, I'm going to briefly explain what is Django. If you're still familiar with Django, there might be stuff you don't know in there, so you might want to still pay attention. Then second part, I'm going to talk about how Django is developed. And then in the third part, how you can contribute to Django's development. So first, what is Django? So that's the motto. It's on the website. It's a web framework for perfectionists with deadlines. So it's a web framework, and it's written in Python, which is appropriate for this event. It has a philosophy of having what you call batteries included. So Django comes out of the box with its ORM to connect to databases. It has its template language. It has a bunch of stuff that comes with it when you install it. If you care about these sort of things, it's MIT license, and it supports Python 3 and 2. Little bit about the history of the project. It was started in 2003 at an online newspaper website. It was open sourced in 2005, in July. And then 3 years later, the 1.0 release was released. It was a big news for the community. Currently, we're at 1.6, that's the latest stable. 1.7 is in beta. Actually, the beta version, the beta release will be released probably in a couple hours, so a little bit of a scoop for you. Django has this thing called the Django Software Foundation. Who here has heard of the Django Software Foundation? So, not everyone knows about this. It wasn't created at the same time as Django went open source. It was created later in 2008. What it is it's an American non-profit organization whose goal is to promote the use of Django and of a good practice for web development. It's funded, so it gets money from corporate members who can give funds to become members of the foundation, and also donations. So if you go on the website, you can donate through PayPal to this foundation. That's all well and good, but what does it do exactly? So the DSF, one of its big roles is to hold the Django trademark. Django has a trademark, which means that you can't use the name Django, the logo, and stuff like that for anything. It is still permissive, so you can use the Django name for, like, if you write a library that has something to do with Django, but you're not allowed, for example, to say that it's officially endorsed by the Django framework. It's quite permissive, but it allows us to ban projects like things that would try to make profits by claiming to be officially related with Django and stuff like that. It's like lawyer stuff, but it's important. A big thing it does, and it impacts all of us, is that it sponsors stuff like sprints. So if you want to organize a Django sprint, you get in touch with the DSF. They can pay for the food, they can pay for the accommodation, or for example, they sponsored me when I came to Krakow last month. They paid for my plane ticket for me to be able to come. They also help pay for meetups. So if you use meetup.com, there's a fee. And if you want to use meetup.com for your local Django meetup, the DSF can give you the money to sign up on meetup.com, for example. Another thing that started recently is that there's awards that's given. For example, there's the Malcolm Tredinnick Memorial Prize that's been given yearly for the first time last year. For those who don't know, Malcolm was a Django core developer who passed away almost a year ago in March. He passed away from a brain aneurysm. He was really young. So the Django Software Foundation set up a prize that will be given every year to a member of the community who promotes what Malcolm was trying to do with the community. Malcolm was very active in getting new people to come to Django. He was a very good teacher, and he got a lot of us to contribute to the project. And this award is given every year to a different person who gets to contribute to the Django community. So that's for DSF. Django, another big part of it, is what we call the core team. I managed to find an older picture of the core team. Maybe you've seen them. So wait, no, that's not this one. So no, I don't have a picture. The core team is the people basically with commit access to Django. So these are the people who are able to push actual code into the repository. There's a total of 44 people in there from 16 different countries and 3 continents. So we're trying to be a global team. Every single person in there is a volunteer, so no one gets paid professionally to be on the core team. And what does it do? First, since everyone is volunteer, we contribute to Django mostly on our free time. And as you probably know, free time comes and goes, so when you become a member of the core team, usually you're very active, but then sometimes you change job or you get a kid or things happen and you get less active, but you don't lose your status, you're still a part of the team. And it so happens that usually you're less active sometimes and then you get more time to contribute, so activity comes and goes. And if you remember, there's 44 core developers in the team, and I made a little extract. This week there were 9 active core developers. If you compare to this month, there were 17, and this year 32. So we're still pretty good with numbers. You see, the past year, 32 out of 44 core developers have had at least one commit in Django. So what do you actually get when you're on a core team? Well, first, the obvious is you have commit access. It turns out this is really scary. The first thing I did when I joined the core team was push the fix for a 1-character typo on the documentation. And I must have rechecked it like 3 or 4 times before I pushed it. Because when you push it, like, it's public and you can't get back. We have a policy like everything that's been pushed out to the master branch is public and you cannot erase it. So like any mistake you will make will be there forever in the GitHub history. So it's really scary, and we also have a Jenkins install, and it complains on the IRC channel when you break the build. So that's also really scary. But it's not as bad as my friend Daniele, who became a core dev, and the first thing he did was force push and erase 24 months of history of the public repo. Shout out to Daniele. There's also an internal mailing list, but barely anything happens. There's like a message every week. It's for internal stuff, and it's not very interesting. We actually have a private repository on GitHub. We use it to work on secret features. Not really, it's like security stuff, so we can test out security release before making them public. The best is probably the private Django jet that we have access to, and we can just use anytime we want. I wish. If you make enough donations to the Django Software Foundation, maybe that can happen, who knows? But basically that's all. So you see, as a core dev, you basically get a lot of responsibilities, but there's not much more than another person in the community. So how do you join the team? Well, first, you don't ask for it. Like, I didn't ask for it. Someone comes to you and say, hey, like, would you like to be part of it? And they come to you because quality contribution. So if you've contributed to Django before and your contributions have been appreciated, and when I say contribution, I will talk about this later, but it doesn't have to be just code. Like Daniele, who I talked about earlier, he was very active in documentation, and he was setting up workshops to get people more involved in Django, and this is really stuff we like, so he joined the core team later on. It's also long-term involvement. There's this weird pattern, and I would like someone to explain me, because I still don't understand, where we see people, they come in and they like work on 10, 15 tickets, they push a lot of stuff for like a month, and then they disappear. So the core team, we're looking for people who not just there for a week or a month, but something like long-term, like we want people who we can rely on. And the process is kind of simple. So an existing core developer like submits the name on the internal mailing list, and there's like a basically 1 week period where people can say yes or no. If there's a no, it's a veto basically. So you usually get all like +1s. Everyone says +1, and if no one opposes you, then within the next week you become part of the core team. So I presented Django. I presented the DSF, the core team. But the biggest and the most important part of Django is probably the community. Not probably, it's definitely the community. I would say it's the most valuable asset of Django. For example, I again ran some really complicated script, as you see. And there's 10 times as many external contributors in the repo as core devs. So remember, 44 core devs, and there's 584 different authors in the history of Django. And that's only for the code. Remember, Django is not just the code. There's also, like, you've probably seen this, right? If you're working with Django and you want to do something, there's probably already someone that made an app for that. If you search on PyPI for Django, you get like 4,000 stuff, 4,000 results. So there's a huge, huge ecosystem of reusable applications for it. There's also, I mean, obviously you know about this, but there's conferences all over the world. Like, there was Django conference in the USA, in Europe, Australia, and there's also stuff in Wales, in Italy, and it's popping up all over the place. And not just conference, but meetups like these, you can find them in many cities around the world. And that's just for Django. Django is Python, so add to this all the Python-related events, and like the community is really, really big. So that was Django. Now, the thing you may be interested about, how exactly is Django developed? So, we have a new release. We say minor release, like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, about every 6 months. It's not a hard deadline. Sometimes it slips, but we try to do it every 6 months. The way it works is there's an alpha release 4 months before the planned final release. Then 2 months later, a beta release. And then 2 weeks before the final release, we have a release candidate. And then the final release. And also, you've probably seen those, like micro release, like 1.5.2, 1.5.3, for either security reasons or like bug fix. We also have this thing, LTS, long-term support, the 1.4 version of Django, which is getting old, but it's still supported until 2015. So if you want long-term support, that is, security fixes will be backported to this, you can just use the 1.4 and it's going to be supported for a long time. And we have the backwards compatibility policy, which means that when you change version of Django, going from 1.5 to 1.6, in theory, your code shouldn't break. You might get warnings that things are going to break later on, but if you go step by step, it shouldn't break. This means, for example, that if you have to do an update of your project to go from a really old version of Django, usually a good trick is to do it step by step, because you do it through, when you cross so many versions, stuff is going to break. But if you only go step by step, in theory, things don't break, but so you get messages. So say you want to go from 1.2, which is not supported anymore, to 1.6. You first go through 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, and you fix the things that break along the way. And that's usually a much better approach than trying to jump through everything and try and fix, because you're going to have many problems. Git and GitHub. So Django started on SVN, as I said, in 2005. But we moved to Git in April 2012 after the community asked for it for a long time. Everyone was like, when the hell are you going to move to Git? Like, Subversion is terrible and stuff. Finally, the decision was made to switch to Git. And in our Git history, we preserved the whole history of the project. And we have today about 17,000 commits. The code is on GitHub. So everybody can have fun and come and fork and contribute pull requests and stuff. We don't use GitHub for the issue system or the wiki. It turns out that when your project grows big, the issue system on GitHub, it doesn't really scale, so we can't really use it. And we have our own wiki as well. We have a bunch of pull requests throughout the life of the project. So since 2012, more than 2,500 pull requests have been opened. I didn't check, but I think we still have like more than 100 that are open currently. So there's a lot of activity on there. So as I mentioned, we don't use the GitHub issues, we use Track. For those who don't know, Track is a bug tracking software written in Python. It's kind of hard to use, but once it's set up, usually by someone else, it works. It's been used actually since the beginning of the project, and it's really a central part of Django's development process, as I will explain later. We currently have more than 22,000 issues on it, like tickets, independent tickets. So we have a really long history. And yeah, as I said, it's a really big project. It can be kind of intimidating, like there's a lot of options and flags and stuff, but it's actually very powerful. And yes, a little message for you, if you're going to use Track for security reports, don't. There is a big message at the top, but no one ever reads messages. If you have security report, there is a special email address you can report. Don't make them public, please. Send them to security@djangoproject.com. Don't put them on Track. And a pro tip, there is this dashboard. If you like to get into working with Track, but you're a bit scared because it looks horrible, there's the cool dashboard. It has like pretty colors, graphs, and numbers, and each of those squares with a graph is clickable, and it gets you to a track page with all the tickets that corresponds, like new tickets, easy tickets, unreviewed tickets that are waiting for a review and stuff. So it's pretty useful if you're at a sprint or if you just want to contribute. Dashboard.djangoproject.com, it's pretty cool. Mailing list, another really big part of Django's development process. There's a Django-developers mailing list. So the idea is this, like, you want to get something into Django. The first step is you come on the mailing list, you write a long email explaining what you want to do, and then ideally, people contribute ideas, core developers come in and say, yeah, this is a good idea, no, it's not a bad idea, maybe try this way. And the goal is that we reach a consensus from the whole community to work on a feature, and only then we can start building. But in practice, either no one answers to your email or like there's a big discussion about bike shedding, but it should be the way to go. And in practice, I'm a bit joking, but in practice, we really try to make the community contribute ideas. It's not just the core team. There's also other mailing lists that you might find useful. By the way, all of this we try to document in our documentation, so all this info you can find on the official documentation. The Django users, if you have problems with Django, questions about how to install it, how to do something you're trying to do and it doesn't work, Django users, it's a great place if you have questions about Django. There's also the core mentorship mailing list. If you're interested in contributing to Django, but you're a bit scared, you don't know how it works, you don't want to make a fool of yourself, Django core mentorship is great. Like the goal of this mailing list is to help you become a core developer. So if that's something you might be interested in, or you just want to contribute to Django but don't know how, sign up for this mailing list. Everyone is friendly and people will help you contribute. Django I18N for discussing internationalization. So if the admin looks weird when you switch language to Polish because it can't conjugate the nouns properly, which I think it does, this is the place to discuss it. Translation issues, you want to create a new language for Django or stuff like that, this is a great place. It's not very active. If you're Django users, is a very active mailing list. Core mentorship, there's barely any activity. I18N, it's also not very active. So if you're worried that you're going to have to read 30 emails every day, don't worry, this is not so active. Django Announce, if you use Django for your company and you're worried about missing security updates and things like that, sign up Django Announce. We publish all the releases, all the security updates, all those things that matter when you're using Django in sensitive places. Sign up to this. Again, very low activity. I mean, there's a release every 6 months, so that's the kind of traffic you can expect. And then if you're really into it, there's Django Updates. Django Updates sends you an email every time someone creates a ticket on Track. every time someone writes a comment on track, and every time someone makes a commit. So it's pretty high traffic. There's about 30 messages every day, but if you're trying to keep track of Django's development, it's pretty great. As I mentioned, internationalization. Django, I tried to count, and I counted it's translated in 81 languages. Obviously, not completely, but there's 81 languages that you can switch your Django install, and there will be translations for it. The translation work is done on Transifex, which is an external website. So, for example, if you're spotting bugs in the translation, you don't report them on track. This happens on this website, Transifex. Again, everybody and anybody is welcome to contribute. All you have to do is sign up on that website. You join a language team, because that's how it works. So say you probably want to work on Polish, right? You join the Polish team, and then you can start translating stuff. And note that currently we're running an experiment where one of the Django core dev, Claude, he's from Switzerland, and he's really passionate about translating stuff, and he went and translated the whole documentation into French. And so currently, it's hosted on the Django project. If you change a URL to, instead of EN for English, change it to FR, the whole stuff is in French. I think it's madness, but he did that. And we're trying to see if it's something that's like, we can scale and we can actually extend it to other languages. There was an independent team from Japan who also did the same. Like, they went ahead and translated like 90% of it. So it's something we're trying to do. So if it's something that interests you and you'd like to see it happen, the Django I-18N mailing list I mentioned earlier is a good place for start the discussion on this. The translation process, since it happens kind of parallel to Django's development, because it's not on with the same channels, it's a bit complicated, but basically, if you ever translated the Django app, you run like make messages, and we do that for Django, and all the strings that have to be translated appear on this website. And from that website, language teams can translate them, so you get either a cool online UI where you can translate stuff from your browser, or you can just do it like old school and download the PO file and use whatever editor you like for them. There's this thing called the string freeze, which looks like a weird expression, but it just means that when the RC is released, so that means 2 weeks before any final release, we say, okay, any strings that's in Django now is not going to change. We guarantee that you have 2 weeks that you can go and finalize if there's any missing translations and stuff like that. You can finish, you have 2 weeks where we're not going to add like 1 hour before the release a new string in Django, and that's going to end up not being translated. So you have 2 weeks basically to finish everything. And when we do the final release, so we put everything in like powerballs and we upload them to PyPI, we download basically everything from Transifex and we put them in the package, in the final package. Now, third part, how you can contribute to Django. There's many ways actually you can help. It's not all about code. A great way to start or even just stay there is to help others. I think by helping others, which I kind of started doing that. I was on IRC a lot, and you just see someone asking a question and you try and answer it. And maybe you don't know anything about, like, it's about forms and you don't know anything about forms. Doesn't matter. You dig through the code, you try and analyze the problem, and the more you do that, the more you start finding yourself digging into Django's internals, and you start getting a really good pictures of how things work, where things break, and by helping others, it's really strengthened your knowledge of Django. So like I mentioned, there's IRC, Django on Freenode, and I believe there's Django-PL. It exists, there's people on them. I tried joining, but no one talked, but it's there. And also, like I said before, the Django users mailing list, it's not only for people who ask questions, because otherwise it'd be a pretty terrible place. It's also for people who give answers, ideally. And if you'd like to help people out, Django users, there's usually way more people asking questions than answering, so if you can like balance this out, it's really great. And the same thing applies, like you really, by helping people out, get a better understanding of Django. Another big thing, so like I said, we release alpha, beta, and release candidate versions. we don't do this because we like making releases. Like, making releases is like horrible. We have a checklist. It's public. You can look it up. There's like 12 steps that we have to follow and not miss one. For example, we once released a release that contained a compiled file, like PYC, which meant that if you try to run on some computers, it would just fail until you deleted those files. That's because in our process, we had forgotten to like clean those files. So there's so many steps, so many places where we can fail that it's not really a fun thing. So we don't do this because we like it. We do this so that you can test it before we do the final release. So you have a project that uses Django. Please try the alpha, the beta, and especially the release candidate version. How to do that? I hope you're using virtualenv and pip. If you don't, probably you should. These are great tools. And if you are, then it's as easy as from your virtualenv, you can pip install and this long URL that points to the tarball, and pip will do the right thing. Actually, you can also install it directly from GitHub. So you do the usual stuff, and at the end, you put this little @ and you specify the name of the tag. So here I put 17b1, which actually wouldn't work now because it hasn't been released, but it will work like in 3 hours. This will work, but the best is this. So pip has this --pre flag, which means it only it installs like preview versions, and you should be able to do that soon because it's not really working. You know, Python packaging is a bit tricky, and we still haven't figured out completely how to do that. We tried, but then it started breaking because pip would install the beta version when you try to install stable version, so that wasn't really cool. And once you try out the pre-release, probably, and I mean, I would hope that you wouldn't, but let's be honest, you are going to find bugs, because that's why we release them, so that you can find the bugs before the final release. So what do you do when you find a bug? Well, if it's a typo, like in the documentation, if it's a typo in docstring or whatever, a simple pull request is fine. So you just fork. On GitHub, you can do everything from online. GitHub has this online editor. You find a typo, fix it, send us back a pull request, and we will merge it. Anything more complex? And really, like, even if it's anything worse than a typo, even if it's simple, like, I don't know, we use an empty string instead of a list or stuff like that. New ticket on track. Again, if it's a security issue, do not report it on track. Send us an email. We are trying to do this right, so not publicly. What's a good ticket? So a lot of my contributions to Django is working on track and triaging tickets. I see a lot of good tickets, a lot of bad ones. So here's a few tips. Like, you want the other person to be able to reproduce your problem. So you want to show the code you're using. Don't just come and say, hey, this doesn't work, and leave it at that. Show us the code you're using, and also which steps you took. So saying, here's the code I'm using, but not saying how to trigger the error is not helpful, because it makes my work harder. I have to dig and try out stuff, and it's a waste of my time. Show the tracebacks if you can, so that when I see a traceback, I get a lot of information from it. It may look like some unreadable mess of text, but it's actually pretty useful. So put tracebacks in your bug reports. Give information about your platform. So if you're using Windows or Mac, or if you have installed some other weird stuff, say it. There's many bugs that are reported that I try and reproduce them, and they work for me, but it turns out because the reporter forgot to mention that they're running on a different OS, or they have a weird setup. Mention as many. It's better to put more info on your install than fewer. And yeah, this one, reduce the scope. So if you give me a link to your project and say, hey, this has a bug, and it's a project that I have to download, and it has 100 dependencies, and it only works on MySQL, you're making my job harder. I have to try out, install stuff. If you can reduce your bug, to as little code as possible, you'll make everyone's job easier. I will be able to tell if there is an issue or not quicker. We'll be able to fix it quicker, because if there's little code, we can isolate where the problem is, and we can fix that easy. So reduce the scope if you can, and it will save everyone some time. So triaging, as I mentioned, so triaging is what we do on track. We get tickets, and we need to say, is this a valid problem? Is it not? Is this a feature request? Do we want to have this in Django? Do we not want to have this in Django? Has this been fixed yet? As I said before, there's tons of old tickets on Django, and some of them actually have been fixed, but they're still open, because we need to go back there and see if they still apply. And this process, everybody can do it. So track is open. You don't have to be a core dev. You don't need a special account. Actually, you don't even need an account. Our track install allows anonymous access, so everybody and anybody can come and change status of tickets. What do you do? So we get about 5 to 10 new tickets every day, and these tickets have to be reviewed. That means figuring out if it's really a problem or not. And anybody can do that. It's not that complicated. You know, the person is explaining the problem. Try and see if you're able to reproduce this issue, and if you can, just say, yes, it is a problem, and flag the ticket as such, and you've saved everybody some time. Old bugs is the best. Like, when you close a really old ticket, I think you should get a medal. Like, Django has now 5-digit tickets, and some really old ones are still open. And the easiest way to close them is because they've actually been fixed, but no one has bothered to make sure that these old bugs have been fixed. So easy points, find old bugs, make sure they're still present, and if they're not, you can just say fixed, and it's pretty cool. Another big thing, review patches or pull requests. So this is a big bottleneck for us, because we get, as I said, we get a lot of pull requests now with GitHub, and we have to review this code. And it's not something that only core devs can do. This anybody can do. You just see someone making a pull request, and GitHub has this cool interface where you can comment on lines, and if you see that this person is using something that could be made better, just leave a comment and improve on the patch, work together, and once it's done, and you think this patch is good enough, it has tests, it has documentation, it's like PEP8 compliant, and it looks good, just say so on the track. You can mark that the ticket is ready for check-in, and anybody again can do that, and it really helps us. As a core dev, if I see that someone else has reviewed the code, then I know that I will give it just a quick review. Whereas if no one has reviewed the code, I have to dig in, I have to make myself familiar with the context of the code, and this takes time. And this is a really big bottleneck. So if there's one thing you could do, reviewing patches is really helpful. The big thing, right, the obvious thing, contributing code and documentation. So there are tickets on track, like I said, bunch of them. Find one that interests you, write a fix for it. Like, obvious way. Also write documentation. You're reading the documentation a lot. You find stuff that's wrong or that could be better. Write documentation for it. Improve it. Documentation tickets are great because you don't need tests for them. You don't need to know Python that well. And it's really easy for us to merge it because if there's a problem, if there's a typo, it's not a big deal. Documentation, we can update it the whole time. It's not like it's going to be released forever somewhere. Documentation is a great place to start contributing to Django. There's also like existing patches or pull requests. Sometimes they're missing tests or documentation, and no one has touched it for like a year, and it's gotten out of sync with master. Just get it back. Like basically, it's usually just a git pull away. You just do that, and then you fix it up. Either add some missing tests or missing documentation, and make a new pull request for it. That's useful. I mentioned before, Django's strength is the community and the amount of third-party libraries there is. And contributing to Django doesn't have to mean contributing to the Django code itself. If you write a good library that people use, that's quality, that has good tests, good documentation, good compatibility, like Python 3 support, it's a great way to contribute to the Django community. So put it up on PyPI, host your documentation and read the docs. You make the community grow by doing that. Blog about it. So there's things that don't belong on the official Django documentation, like for a long time, and we still don't promote third-party applications a lot, but if you use them, if you like the setup that you have, blog about it. By writing up about your experience, how you use Django, you're creating a network and a community of blog articles that's also very useful. So yeah, you can. There's documentation that belongs to the community, and blogging, if that's your thing, it's a great way. And I think most people who've done Django have at some point written a blog engine. So if you don't even have a blog, you can write one with Django. You can write your own blog engine with Django and then start blogging about Django. It's very meta. Attend events. This is kind of the obvious. I mean, you're here, right? So when you attend Django or Python events, you meet the community. You become part of it. You learn cool stuff, like you see presentations about cool apps or new technologies or stuff you can do about Django, and this is also important for the health of the community. It's about learning new stuff. And you make friends. I've made tons of friends by going through events. It's a great way to make the community bigger and stronger by becoming a part of it, and everybody is welcome. Django has a policy, a code of conduct that we want everybody to be welcome in our community, so we want you to be a part of our community. You can't code, it's okay. Come in our community, we're welcoming you. We want everyone in our community. Yeah, level up. So you'd like to go to an event, but you can't find one that you would like to attend. Like, what can you do? Well, you organize one. Maybe Przemek will tell you, but you probably will not sleep for several days, but you will actually learn a ton, and it really gives you a different and a new perspective on the community, seeing how you can build it up and gathering so many people who are here for Django. It will really give you a fresh perspective. And as far as events go, I think there's something for everyone. And like I said, if there isn't, add your stuff to the list. There's international conferences. There's DjangoCon in the US, in Europe, in Australia. There's local meetups like these. And there's also sprints. So there's a sprint every year in Krakow. There's sprints in Amsterdam, usually after conferences. If you just want to attend sprints, it's for free. You can go for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and you work on Django or other stuff. You meet people. It's a great way to get yourself familiar with community. So that's my talk. Django, I try to explain, it's really a community project. So it's not just a core team doing stuff and people helping out. It's really the community being there, and the core team's job is to enable the community. We strive for openness and transparency. And anything else that's not open or not transparent, I personally find it's a bug. So if you find such a bug, help us fix it. Dziękuję. Pytania?